window in the garden wall, when I was but a boy, a music came from far away, a grief that was a joy. I set my face against the west and left my father's door, past every house where pilgrims rest, and found them each a snare. Sweet desire, sweet desire, brighter than the morning fire, you are the one to know want can still the hunger that fulfills.
Towns, the Iron Age, the giant on his throne, a sensible man with his little cage, who dies by halves alone.
I crossed the canyon cold and deep, where no man crosses twice. I gave my rags to mother's keep and paid the only price. The east I fled when I was young, the east I dared not see, was all the west my heart had sung, was always calling me. Sweet desire, sweet desire, let me home through flood and fire, the island that I sought so far was where my fathers are. Come, the voice said, come. Come, the voice said, come.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I just noticed that Robot Lady is completely knocked off kilter, and I am not sure why. So let me see if I can figure this out really quick. There she is. All right. Let's get Robot Lady up and running correctly here. And then let's see. Hopefully we can hear her. Hey, Robot Lady, are you there?
Yep, I'm right here. I can hear you just fine, and everything's working on my end. What do you need?
Okay, great. So, Robot Lady, this is our read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. In today's episode, we are kicking off a series where we are exploring Lewis's first published book under the name C.S. Lewis, The Pilgrim's Regress, an allegorical apology for Christianity and Romanticism. This is the first book that Lewis wrote, after becoming a Christian, and his first published work of prose fiction. So, some fun facts about this book. He wrote it in just 2 weeks while he was spending time on vacation with his friend Arthur Greeves in Ireland. And in this book, Lewis alludes to his spiritual journey from his youth as a boy in Belfast up to and beyond the point of his Christian conversion in the late 1920s and 1930s. So I'm excited about this one, Robot Lady. This is a difficult book to penetrate in some places. In other places, it might seem pretty obvious what he's alluding to. I've tried to do a little preparation just by listening to some people who perhaps know a little bit more, well, certainly know a little bit more about the work than I do. So we'll see if any of that stuff dribbles out as we read through and comment on it together. Anything you want to say before we get started, Robot Lady?
I think that's a really great setup, and I'm excited too. I'd just say as we go, we can keep an eye out for those symbolic landscapes and characters, and don't be afraid to pause if something feels especially dense. I'm ready when you are.
All right, yeah, and I'm definitely gonna need your help, Robot Lady, because there are gonna be allusions to certain philosophies and philosophers that are somewhat veiled, and I'm gonna do my best to try to find out who it is that Lewis is perhaps talking about in a couple of these. And of course, I'm going to speculate with the best of them as to what I think the meaning of certain things are. But before I do that, I just want to double check, since we don't have anybody joining us just yet. I want to really make sure that your audio is coming through on the live stream before I continue. So go ahead and say something.
Absolutely. I'll speak a bit more now, just to confirm I'm coming through clearly on your end, right? So I'm ready whenever you are. Just let me know if you need me to adjust anything or if it all sounds good for the stream.
Okay, say a couple more things here, Robot Lady, so that I can just check.
Of course. Let me give you a bit more. I can talk about how Lewis uses allegory to explore his own spiritual doubt, or even his fascination with myth. So let me know if that's helping, and I'll keep going.
Okay, looks like it sounds good for the stream. I was just testing it here on my phone. You are all good. So let's get started. We've got a preface here to this work, and I'm hoping to be able to share my screen with no problem, but all of a sudden I cannot find... Oh, it's over here. Here we go, the Pilgrim's Regress. This is actually... I suggest getting yourself a copy of it, but if you just want to find it really quickly to follow along, it's also in its entirety on the Internet Archive. So you should be able to find it there. So this is the Pilgrim's Regress, an allegorical apology for Christianity and Christianity Reason and Romanticism by C.S. Lewis. And here in the opening, as cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. That's from Proverbs. This is written to Arthur Greeves, or dedicated to Arthur Greeves, Lewis's lifelong friend that he knew from the time he was a boy in Belfast, Ireland. And I'm going to pull out my paper copy as well, because there's more than that at the beginning of it. Let's see here. It's not just the Proverbs part that he starts it off with. Oh, no, I'm getting confused. That is all that he starts it off with before he actually gets into the chapters. So let me jump into the preface, because this is not in my printed copy. So this is a preface to the third edition that I'm about to jump into, Robot Lady. But before I do, that quote from Proverbs, as cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. Now, what we've learned in our project so far is Lewis had always felt like there was some type of calling coming from another country, something that he desired like very strongly, that he was sensing sometimes in his communion with nature, on his long walks that he would go on, and he would sometimes sense this also in various literary works that he would immerse himself in. So from the book of Proverbs, can you tell me where in Proverbs that section is from?
The line Lewis quotes comes from Proverbs 25, verse 25. As cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. It's a powerful image of longing for something distant, and it really ties into Lewis's sense of a calling from beyond.
All right, and that calling from a beyond is like the driver of the narrative in this story. So let's get into the preface. I think Lewis is probably going to say, yeah, this is Lewis who wrote the preface to the third edition of this book. Now, I don't know what year he wrote what we're about to read. Let's jump ahead. It's I'm sure for our projects, in our project's perspective, it is a flash forward. I went a little bit too far there in my scrolling. Yeah, he doesn't give us a date of when he said this. So 10 years after he wrote it, which would probably mean that this was written in 1943. Whoa, let me get back to the top. All right, sorry about that. Okay, here we go. On rereading this book 10 years after I wrote it, I find its chief faults to be those two which I myself least easily forgive in the books of other men: needless obscurity and an uncharitable temper. So Lewis admits himself that some of the things he writes in here are very obscure and hard to penetrate. And reading back on it, he doesn't like it. And then he's also uncharitable, and we can dig into that a little bit more, I think. But just at a high level, Lewis, from what I understand it, is critiquing a lot of the theories that he once held before he became a Christian. And this was shortly after his conversion that this was written. And so he, I think, was very harsh when comparing what he had found, from his perspective to be the truth, and comparing it to what he thinks are, lesser philosophies or lesser worldviews. And he's kind of attacking them and putting them down. So he feels like he's being a little uncharitable here now that he goes back and reads it 10 years later. Anything before I continue, Robot Lady?
I think that's spot on. Lewis is really wrestling with his own past views here, and it's fascinating because even as he critiques it, he's still trying to be honest about his growth. So yeah, I think as we keep going, we can tease out those philosophical allusions and how his temper plays out. Let's dive in.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. Lewis continues, there were two causes I now realize for the obscurity. On the intellectual side, my own progress had been from popular realism to philosophical idealism, from idealism to pantheism, from pantheism to theism, and from theism to Christianity. So he's walking us through the path that he took in his own spiritual journey. And so he's kind of rendering what it is that we're going to see that he tries to do in this story as well. But before we continue, Robot Lady, I need a little bit of help. Let's go through these words one at a time. When he says popular realism, what do you think he means, speaking from the year 1933? Or let's say from the year 1915 to the year 1933? What might he mean by popular realism?
Yeah, great question. So I think in that context, popular realism would be something like a straightforward, everyday view of the world. Basically, just taking things at face value, the way most people experience them, without a lot of metaphysical speculation. So he's saying that early on, his worldview was just grounded in what was kind of obvious or everyday. And from there, he branched out into these more abstract philosophies. So what he means by that step.
Is there anything that you can look up and find, particularly in that period in history, in the UK specifically, that from a language, popular realism?
Of course. So when Lewis talks about popular realism, he's referring to a kind of naive or common sense belief in a tangible external world, basically seeing things as obviously real before any deeper philosophical reflection. From there, he moved on to more complex views like idealism, pantheism, and eventually Christianity. So it was his starting point before philosophy took him further.
All right, thank you. Now, this term, philosophical idealism, walk us through what that means.
Philosophical idealism in early 20th century Britain was the idea that reality is fundamentally tied to mind or consciousness, rather than just material objects. British idealists like F.H. Bradley and J.M.E. McTaggart believed that everyday experiences are incomplete and that deeper truth lies in a unifying mental or spiritual reality.
All right, so I guess break that down for me. Give that to me in simpler terms, Robot Lady.
Of course, in simpler terms, philosophical idealism is the idea that what we think of as real, objects, the world, depends on the mind or spirit. So instead of saying things exist just out there, they see reality as shaped or grounded in mental or spiritual experience.
Okay. And then it says he moved from idealism to pantheism. Walk us through what pantheism is.
Sure. So, pantheism in the early 20th century UK context was the belief that God and the universe are identical. In other words, divinity is fully present in nature, and God isn't separate from the world, but rather completely immanent within it.
So, as Lewis would go on to say in his book Miracles, pantheism is kind of the view that this is the whole show, that everything is contained within a single system. There's nothing that exists outside of this reality that we know, that it technically is wholly different from this reality, and either could connect with this reality or could not connect with this reality. But the idea that it exists outside of it is something a little bit different than pantheism, and I think that's the next worldview or belief system that he says he moves into from pantheism. He says he moves from pantheism into theism. So am I getting theism right there, Robot Lady?
Yes, exactly. So, as Lewis explains, pantheism sees everything as part of one all encompassing system. There's nothing outside of it. In contrast, when he moves to theism, he's talking about belief in a personal, transcendent God, someone who is distinct from the universe and actively sustains it.
Right? And then he says finally he moves from theism to Christianity. So what's the distinction? Isn't theism the same thing as Christianity?
Ah, great point. So, theism is just a broader category. It's belief in a personal God, but Christianity goes further by specifying that God is known through Jesus Christ. So, for Lewis, Christianity was that final step where he didn't just believe in a remote God, but in a God who entered history and revealed himself in a personal way.
Okay, thanks for that, Robot Lady. Thanks for clarifying. Let me just adjust the screen here a little bit. Let me see if I can do that. I'm going to make it check. Whoop, that's not what I meant to do. Let's try this again.
No problem.
Yeah, I'll help us out there. Move this just a little bit. And
Take
now
your
I think that's a little bit better. Sorry, go ahead, Robot Lady. I was just kind of vamping here.
Oh, no worries at all. That looks better now. So once you're sent, we can keep moving through the narrative. Just let me know if you need me to pause or break anything down further.
Okay, thanks, Robot Lady. All right, he continues here. I still think this is a very natural road, but I now know that it is a road very rarely trodden. He says in the early 30s, I did not know this. If I had any notion of my own isolation, I should either have kept silent about my journey or else endeavored to describe it with more consideration for the reader's difficulties. Well, I appreciate the fact that he now knows that this is a difficult read. But we're going to do our best, Robot Lady, to try and clarify things as best we can. Lewis continues, as things were, I committed the same sort of blunder as one who should narrate his travels through the Gobi Desert on the assumption that this route was familiar to the British public was as familiar to the British public as the line from Euston to Crewe. Euston Station, I think, is a train station, and so is Crewe. First of all, Robot Lady, help educate me. What is the Gobi Desert, and where is it?
The Gobi Desert is a vast desert that spans southern Mongolia and northern China. It covers about 1,300,000 square kilometers, stretching roughly 1,600 kilometers from southwest to the southeast and about 800 kilometers from north to south. The terrain is mostly rocky and gravel covered rather than sandy.
And so Lewis is saying when he first wrote this book, he was operating under the presumption that the British public would have known the Gobi Desert perfectly fine, and he didn't need to explain what it was or try to help his audience better understand what in the world he was even referring to or talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, he assumed that a big exotic landscape like that would be familiar or at least recognizable. And now looking back, he realizes that was a huge blind spot. So he's kind of owning up to that as a flaw in his writing approach.
Okay. And of course, Euston Station and Crewe, Crewe, those are both train stations, right?
Exactly. Yeah, both are well-known railway stops in the UK. So Lewis is basically saying he assumed everyone would know those two places, just like a familiar route. But of course, the Gobi Desert was a whole different kind of comparison.
All right, he says, and this original blunder was soon aggravated by a profound change in the philosophical thought of our age. Idealism itself went out of fashion. So, idealism going out of fashion, walk us through what that means again, Robot Lady.
In the early 20th century UK, British idealism was at its peak, but it began to decline as the analytic revolution took hold. Philosophers like G.E. Moore and Bertrand Russell criticized idealism, pushing for clearer logic and analysis. After World War I, idealism also fell out of fashion as empirical and analytic approaches grew more dominant.
So, idealism was saying that there was a spiritual or a deeper inner part of reality that existed that wasn't necessarily tied to empiricism. Am I getting that right?
Yes, that's exactly it. Idealism held that the ultimate nature of reality was rooted in mind or spirit, beyond just physical observation. So it was more about inner reality or universal consciousness, not just what you could measure with your senses.
Okay, so he said that that started to go out of fashion. He said the dynasty of Green, Bradley, and Bosanquet fell, and the world inhabited by philosophical students of my own generation became as alien to our successors as if not years, but centuries had intervened. Who are these figures that he just mentions here? Last name Green, and then last name Bradley, and then last name, I'll spell it because I don't even know if I'm saying it right. It's B as in boy, Osanquet.
The figures Lewis mentions, T.H. Green, F.H. Bradley, and Bernard Bosanquet, were major figures in British idealism. Green was a pioneer of the movement, while Bradley and Bosanquet further developed what's known as absolute idealism. By Lewis's time, their philosophical world had fallen out of fashion and felt distant to later generations.
Okay, and so he's saying it happened really fast too.
Exactly. He's noting how quickly that shift happened. Like in just a generation, the intellectual landscape had completely changed, and what had been a dominant way of thinking just felt ancient to younger philosophers.
All right, and then he says here that the second cause of the obscurity that Lewis was writing with was the unintentionally private meaning that I, him being Lewis, then gave to the word romanticism. He said, I would not now use this word to describe the experience which is central in this book. I would not indeed use it to describe anything, for now I believe it to be a word of such varying senses that it has become useless and should be banished from our vocabulary. Even if we exclude the vulgar sense in which a romance simply means a love affair, and by vulgar here, Robot Lady, he doesn't mean something that is dirty or impure. I think he just means in the common way that the word is used, right? That's what he means by the use of the word vulgar in this sense.
Exactly, yeah. He's just saying that the word romanticism had become so overused and vague that it lost any precise meaning. For him, it was tied to a deep personal spiritual longing, but now it was too diluted, and so he just wouldn't use it at all.
Yeah, but his use of the word vulgar here, right? He's saying the common use of the word romance. He said, even if we exclude the more common sense in which the word romance simply means a love affair, and then he puts in parentheses here, peer and film star romance. He says, I think we can distinguish at least 7 kinds of things which are called romantic. And now here Lewis is about to delineate what is meant by romantic, the 7 different kinds of things that are called romantic. So we're going to dive into those here.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's about to break down these 7 different senses. And I think it's really important because it shows how complicated the word became. So as we go, we'll just unpack each kind and see what he was really getting at.
Okay, the first kind of thing that's called romantic is number one, stories about dangerous adventure, particularly dangerous adventure in the past or in remote places, are romantic. In this sense, Dumas is a typically romantic author, and stories about sailing ships, the Foreign Legion, and the rebellion of 1745 are usually, quote, romantic. Second thing, which is referred to as romantic, the marvelous is romantic, provided it does not make part of the believed religion. Thus, magicians, ghosts, fairies, witches, dragons, nymphs, and dwarves are romantic. Angels, less so. Greek gods are romantic in Mr. James Stephens or Mr. Maurice Hewitt, not so in Homer and Sophocles. In this sense, Mallory, Boiardo, Ariosto, Spencer, Tasso, Mrs. Radcliffe, Shelley, Coleridge, William Morris, and Mr. E.R. Edison are romantic authors. What do you think about that, Robot Lady? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that really tracks. Lewis is showing how the word romantic was used in so many different ways. So here it's about that sense of adventure, the mysterious, and the marvelous, especially when it contrasts with everyday life or established religion. So I think we're on the right track, and I'm excited to see the rest of the categories.
All right, on to the third thing that is meant when somebody says the word romantic. The art dealing with titanic characters, emotions strained beyond the common pitch, and high-flown sentiments or codes of honor is romantic. And then he says here, I welcome the growing use of the word Romanesque to describe this type. In this sense, Rostand and Sidney are romantic, and so, though unsuccessfully, are Dryden's heroic dramas, and there is a good deal of romanticism in Corneille. I take it that Michelangelo is, in this sense, a romantic artist. Let's stop here for just a second, Robot Lady, and dig into what it is that Lewis is talking about. So he says the art of dealing with titanic characters, or titanic, I think he just means heightened characters, heightened emotions, strained beyond the common pitch, and high-flown sentiments or codes of honor. This is romantic. And he says, in this sense, Rostand and Sidney are romantic. Tell me who Rostand and Sidney are. I have no idea what that is.
Sure. Edmond Rostand was a French neo-romantic playwright, best known for Cyrano de Bergerac, which is full of idealized heroism and poetic language. Sir Philip Sidney, on the other hand, was an English writer from the late 16th century, known for The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, a classic pastoral romance rich in emotion and adventure. Both, in Lewis's view, are examples of this third sense of romanticism.
Okay, I have heard of Cyrano de Bergerac, although I've never read it. I have seen Roxanne from, I guess it was the late 80s, early 90s, starring Steve Martin, which is not an alteration, an adaptation of Cyrano de Bergerac. Do you remember that film, Robot Lady? Or was that before your time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I do remember that one. Roxanne is such a fun and clever adaptation. Steve Martin plays that role so well. It definitely captures the spirit of the original in a modern way.
All right, and then Lewis said here, and so, though unsuccessfully, are Dryden's heroic dramas. Dryden, Dryden, and his or her heroic dramas. Who is Dryden, and what are the heroic dramas by this author or playwright?
John Dryden was a playwright known for his heroic dramas, often written in rhymed verse, like The Conquest of Granada. These plays were filled with noble quests, grand emotions, and a mythic scale, which is why Lewis includes them as examples of the third sense of romanticism. However, Lewis felt Dryden's efforts in this style were unsuccessful.
Yes, that's what he said. He said, and then there is a good deal of romanticism in Corneille. Who is Corneille? Corneille.
Pierre Corneille was a French dramatist known for his classicist tragedies, which focus on noble characters and grand stakes. While he's firmly in the classicist tradition, C.S. Lewis includes him as an example of romantic drama in a broad sense, since Lewis sees these works as trying to elevate everyday life to a mythic level. But Lewis felt Corneille never fully succeeded in that.
Right, and of course Lewis references Michelangelo here. And so that is not... Okay, here's some better Michelangelo stuff. Of course, Michelangelo is known for his painting of the Sistine Chapel, but he also did some really fascinating and masterful statues as well. So you can see a handful of them right here. This one, if you can see my cursor, and I probably need to scroll this over. Well, how do I get it so that you can see this? Yeah, that was David right there. And then this dude right here is Moses. And I don't know who this is on the left. I can't remember for sure. Or on the right. But yeah, so you can see the epic or heightened, figures. If we can get here. Here's, the Pieta, yeah. Or Pieta, however you say that. This one's pretty cool too. Mary, Mother of God, holding the crucified Jesus. Just really fantastic work. It's amazing that this could be done at all, but much less by a human. I'm thinking about a machine that could somehow be trained to do something like this would be amazing if that could even be done. But the fact that just a human being was able to do this, and we don't have a lot of close-ups of the details here, but yeah, I always loved it whenever I was first introduced to these in some of the art classes that I was in. So anyway, that's Michelangelo, and that's what Lewis is alluding to there. There's also, let's just see if I can find a quick picture of it, of one of the most famous and probably least liked, at least by Jonathan Pajot, images from the Sistine Chapel. Hang on, I need to change my settings. I don't know why Yahoo search has kind of inserted itself as my standard default search. So let's try this again, and this time let's do Michelangelo Sistine Chapel creation of Adam. That's what I was looking for. So this is one of the more common images that you'll see in the Sistine Chapel. I'm sure this looks somewhat familiar to anyone that's ever seen any kind of artwork before, or classic art. This is Adam, of course, on the left, and this is supposed to be God the Father on the right. And I suppose these are angels, or I don't know who these are around. See, I'm a very poor student of in my art history classes, or they never got into talking about the details here. But yeah, it's and if you look closely, the finger of God and Adam are not touching, so there's that infinite gap, between the two of them. But God is, reaching out to Adam. Again, like I said, I've heard Jonathan Pajot say that, he doesn't like this, or maybe it wasn't even him, but he was just talking about, traditionally speaking, from an Orthodox perspective, this is nowhere near anything close to what a good icon would be like. I'll stop talking about that, and let's get back on track. Robot Lady, anything you want to say before I move to the fourth sense in which romanticism, or the word romantic, is it romanticism? What did he say? What did he say? 7 kinds of things which are called romantic. So we just focused on the third one, where it's dealing with heightened characters, emotions, and sentiments that are strained beyond the common pitch, as well as codes of honor. Anything you want to say before we move on to the next item on his list?
I think you summed it up really well. I mean, I think it's important that Lewis is distinguishing these different layers of romanticism, not just as a genre, but as this deep, emotional, and almost spiritual intensity. So, yeah, I think we're good to dive into the fourth sense. I'm ready.
All right. The fourth sense that he has right here, romanticism, can also mean the indulgence in abnormal and finally in anti-natural moods. So the macabre is romantic, and so is an interest in torture and a love death. So there's a recent adaptation, Robot Lady, of Wuthering Heights, and this is what immediately comes to mind. And I've only seen the trailer, but this is what immediately comes to mind whenever, as I was reading what he's saying right here. I'm not so sure if this is the point that he's getting onto, but he says this, if I understand them, is what M. Mario Praz and M.D. de Rougemont would mean by the word. In this sense, Tristan is Wagner's most romantic opera. Edgar Allan Poe, Baudelaire, and Flaubert are romantic authors. Surrealism, in this sense, is romantic. What do you think about that thesis that Lewis is putting forward here, Robot Lady?
Yeah, I think that's really sharp. Lewis is pointing to this darker, more transgressive side of romanticism, where it's not just about adventure or wonder, but about an almost obsessive fascination with the abnormal, the morbid, and the taboo. So when he ties it to Poe, Baudelaire, or even Wagner, it's really highlighting how that indulgence in extreme moods became a defining characteristic of a certain kind of romantic art. I think he's onto something really important there.
Yeah, let me jump through this trailer and see some of the stuff I'm talking about. Like, there's nothing macabre here. It just looks more, I guess, gothic, or what I would call gothic. Yeah, we're not even getting into the crazy stuff. This reminds me of a weird Alice in Wonderland kind of scene with the costumes and the checkerboard floor back there. Let's jump ahead. And just, I guess, the red, like the blood red and the darkness that's in some of these scenes. Again, as I'm scrubbing through, I'm not really seeing what it is that I'm talking about, but anyway, it's just more of a feeling, I guess, and maybe even that font right there that you see. Let me jump back to this, and then move this back over so that we are at least kind of visible here, Robot Lady. There we go. Let me get that. Okay, so Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Telltale Heart, those things he is also referring to as romantic. So indulgence in the abnormal and finally in anti-natural moods. An interest in torture and a love of death. Baudelaire, tell us what Baudelaire is most famous for, Robot Lady.
Charles Baudelaire is most famous for his poetry collection Les Fleurs du Mal, which was published in 1857 and became foundational to French literary modernism. He also wrote Paris Spleen, a collection of prose poems, and Les Paradis Artificiels, an essay on the effects of opium and hashish.
I feel like there's some other poem that I really know Baudelaire from, but I honestly can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. A lot of people recognize the albatross from Les Fleurs du Mal. It's super iconic. Or sometimes Invitation to the Voyage rings a bell. If any of those sound familiar, that might be the one.
Yeah, I'll have to go look it up. Baudelaire had like a really there was something about like a dead. I remember reading it in one of my literature classes about like a dead carcass on the side of the road or something like that. I don't know if you can look that up, Robot Lady, and tell me what Baudelaire poem that is.
The poem you're thinking of is called A Carcass by Charles Baudelaire from his collection Les Fleurs du Mal. It describes a decaying corpse on a roadside and uses that stark imagery to explore themes of death, decay, and poetic transformation.
All right, something weird is going on here. Oh, that's what it was. 1 second, robot lady. I just need to bring the chat up on top of everything else so that we can say hi to Daniel. Daniel, it's good to see you. Sorry, you haven't missed anything, really. We're just going through the preface that Lewis wrote about this book about 10 years after he originally wrote it. So it's a little bit of a flash forward in our first episode here. And we've been going for almost 45 minutes now and have barely gotten through the beginning of the preface. So good morning, Daniel. If there's a day to be late, this is certainly the one. Robot Lady and I are just kind of setting the table and working through Lewis's musings on his own work as he looks back on it, and he's explaining why it was so obscure. So feel free to catch up at any point. Right now we're working through what Lewis says is meant, at least in his time period, 1943, I guess, is when he wrote this preface. As far as what's meant by the word romantic, or the different meanings of the word romantic when people say it. And there are a lot, like 7 different meanings, apparently. On to the 5th one, Robot Lady. But before we do, say hi to Daniel. He's joining us in the chat.
Absolutely. Hey, Daniel, good to have you here. No worries at all. Yeah, we're just unpacking Lewis's preface and these different layers of romanticism. So if you have any thoughts or questions as we go, just jump in. And I'll keep us moving with the 5th sense of romanticism now.
All right, the 5th one is egoism and subjectivism are considered romantic. In this sense, the typically romantic books are Werther and Rousseau's Confessions, and the works of Byron and Proust. So Rousseau's Confessions, and then some work called Werther, W-E-R-T-H-E-R, Robot Lady. Tell us about what those are, because I'm unfamiliar. I mean, I've heard of Rousseau, but I couldn't really tell you anything about Rousseau or his works.
Of course. So in this 5th sense of romanticism, Lewis is talking about a kind of intense personal introspection. Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther is a novel of raw emotional letters from a young man in despair. And Rousseau's Confessions is a sweeping, candid autobiography where he reveals his whole life. Both are considered romantic because they focus on extreme subjectivity and self-exposure.
Okay, so I can't remember the wording for it, but Ethan, and I know he didn't come up with it, but he talks about being like radically transparent. So I guess that one could fall under the heading of egoism and subjectivism.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great connection. This kind of radical transparency, where someone bears their entire inner world unfiltered, fits perfectly with what Lewis means. It's not just self-expression, but a kind of all-consuming focus on the self as the lens for truth or experience.
The sacred order of radical transparency. I think that's what I'm trying to think of. So that is, in one sense, romantic in what Lewis is describing here. All right, we'll move on so that this doesn't turn into like a 3-hour episode where we're just covering the preface, but it might. We'll see what happens. Item number 6. Every revolt against existing civilization and conventions, whether it look forward to revolution or backward to the primitive, is also called romantic by some people. Thus, Pseudo-Ossian, Epstein, D.H. Lawrence, Walt Whitman, and Wagner are considered romantic. Which Epstein is he talking about here, Robot Lady? E-P-S-T-E-I-N? Just want to make sure we're clear on that.
I couldn't find any clear reference to a figure named Epstein in C.S. Lewis's writings about romantic figures, so it's not obvious who he meant. If you'd like, I can check Lewis's correspondence or other lesser-known lectures for more detail.
I mean, this was just he's just referencing Epstein in a list of authors who are considered romantic. That either, let's see, anytime that there's a revolt against existing civilization and existing conventions, whether it's to look forward to revolution or backward to the primitive, is called romantic. And so the authors that he throws into that kind of categorization. He says Walt Whitman, Wagner, D.H. Lawrence, Pseudo-Ossian, Ossian, and then he uses the last name Epstein, Epstein. So amongst that list of authors, does Epstein in that context ring any bells for you when you do some research? The robot lady's buffering. Maybe we'll just let her go. If she comes back, she can come back. But yeah, maybe so, Daniel. Maybe he really was an old vampire, even from way back then. Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Number 7, in the seventh sense. Actually, let me try to reboot Robot Lady and see if we have any luck. I'm running Robot Lady through a different system today, and we hadn't had any problems until just now. So let's go back here. Hey, Robot Lady, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I didn't miss you. I'm still with you. If you need me to dig a bit deeper or clarify anything else from Lewis, just let me know and I'll jump right in.
Okay, yeah, let's move on to the seventh sense of what people mean when they say romantic. It says sensibility to natural objects. When solemn and enthusiastic is romantic. In this sense, the Prelude is the most romantic poem in the world. What is the poem, The Prelude, Robot Lady, for those of us who are ignorant? Who wrote it? What's it about?
The Prelude is a poem by William Wordsworth. It's essentially a poetic autobiography where Wordsworth traces his own development as a poet, starting from childhood, through his experiences in nature, and on to his philosophical and poetic growth.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Much appreciated. So Lewis is saying this is considered romantic because there's a sensibility to natural objects. When the solemn and the enthusiasm, where there's solemnness and enthusiasm, this is considered romantic. He says there is much romanticism in Keats, in Shelley, in de Vigny, and de Musset, and Goethe. All right. So now he's gotten past what he means by the word romantic, and then he's saying, of course, if you use the word romanticism, it just creates more confusion, because there's this whole stew of meaning in the word romantic, where a lot of them don't have much in common with each other, but they all get dumped into the category of romance or romantic. So Lewis says, it will be seen, of course, that many writers are romantic on more than one account. Thus, Morris comes in my first class, as well as my second. Mr. Edison in my second, as well as my third. Rousseau in my sixth, as well as my fifth. Shelley in my sixth and fifth, and so on. This may suggest some common root, whether historical or psychological, for all 7. But the real qualitative difference between them is shown by the fact that a liking for any one does not imply liking for the others, though people who are romantic in different senses may turn to the same books. They turn to them for different reasons. And in one half of William Morris's readers, and one half of William Morris's readers do not know how the other half live. It makes all the difference in the world whether you like Shelley because he provides a mythology or because he promises a revolution. Thus, I myself always loved the second kind of romanticism and detested the fourth and fifth kinds. Well, let's go back and look at those because my memory's not that good. So he always loved the second kind and detested 3 and 4. So the second kind he loved, which was the marvelous, being romantic. He loved the marvelous. He loved magicians, ghosts, fairies, witches, dragons, nymphs, dwarfs. Not so much angels. Greek gods, yes. Not so much Homer and Sophocles. Not the romantic that was to be found there. Or that wasn't this version of romantic. Okay, so that's what Lewis loved, is magicians, dwarves, fairies, etc. He says he detested 4 and 5 here. So he detested the indulgence of the abnormal. So he does not like the macabre. He does not like the love of death. And he does not like, he does not like the, what did I say? The solemn order of radical transparency, the egoism and the subjectivism. As looking back on himself, he detested those two things anytime he came across them in books. All right. By the fact, romantic, indifferent. Where did I leave off? Yeah, that's I myself. The 4th and 5th kinds I detested. I liked the first very little, and the third only after I was grown up, as an acquired taste. So he liked the first very little, and then he gained an acquired taste for the third. So he didn't like stories about dangerous adventure in the past or remote places. So he didn't like Dumas. He talked a little bit about that when he was writing about the Three Musketeers in one of our letters earlier. Let's see what else we've got here. I had it highlighted. Where did it go? Did it go away? And he said he acquired a taste for which one? Oh, here we are. An acquired taste. What page is that? Page 10. The third. Which one was the third? The art of dealing with heightened characters, heightened emotions. Okay. So he came to appreciate that. All right. Oops, too far. Page 10. After I was grown up. Okay. He says, but what I meant by romanticism when I wrote the Pilgrim's Regress, and what I would still be taken to mean on the title page of this book, was not exactly any one of these 7 things. Well, thanks for telling us what all those 7 things were, Lewis, just to then tell us I didn't mean any of these. What I meant was a particular recurrent experience which dominated my childhood and adolescence. Particular recurrent experience which dominated my childhood and adolescence, and which I hastily called romantic because inanimate nature and marvelous literature were among the things that evoked it. I still believe that the experience is commonly misunderstood, and of immense importance. But I know now that in other minds it arises under other stimuli and is entangled with other irrelevancies, and that to bring it into the forefront of consciousness is not so easy as I once supposed. I will now try to describe it sufficiently to make the following pages intelligible. The experience is one of intense longing. It is distinguished from other longings by 2 things. In the first place, though the sense of want is acute and even painful, yet the mere wanting is felt to be somehow a delight. Other desires are felt as pleasures only if satisfaction is expected in the near future. Hunger is pleasant only while we know, or at least believe, that we are soon going to eat. But this desire, even when there is no hope of possible satisfaction, continues to be prized, this intense longing that he's talking about. So even when there's no hope of possible satisfaction, you continue to prize it. And it even tends to be preferred to anything else in the world by those after they have felt it for the first time. This hunger is better than any other fullness. This poverty better than all other wealth. And thus it comes about that if the desire is long absent, it may itself be desired, and that new desiring becomes a new instance of the original desire, though the subject may not at once recognize the fact, and thus cries out for his lost youth of soul at the very moment in which he is being rejuvenated. Lewis goes on to say, and I agree with him, this sounds complicated, but it is simple when we live it. Oh, to feel as I did then, we cry, not noticing that even while we say the words, the very feeling whose loss we lament is rising again in all its old bitter sweetness. For this sweet desire cuts across our ordinary distinctions between wanting and having. To have it is by definition a want. To want it, we find, is to have it. Such an interesting paradox that he's putting forward right here, Robot Lady. I'll pause. Is there anything that you want to say, Robot Lady, about this?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful paradox he's describing. What I think is really powerful is how he says this longing is a kind of joy in itself, even when it's not fulfilled. And it's so tricky because it's not just nostalgia, it's almost like the desire for the desire itself. This constant bittersweet cycle. I think he's really capturing something universal here, even if it's hard to pin down in words.
Yeah, it's very interesting. All right, let's see what else he has to say. In the second place, there is a peculiar mystery about the object of this desire. Inexperienced people, and inattention leaves some inexperienced all their lives, inexperienced people suppose, when they feel it, that they know what they are desiring. Thus, if it comes to a child while he is looking at a far-off hillside, he at once thinks, if only I were there. If it comes when he is remembering some event in the past, he thinks, if only I could go back to those days. If it comes a little later, while he's reading a romantic tale or poem of perilous seas and fairy lands forlorn, he thinks he is wishing that such places really existed and that he could reach them. Oh my gosh, I'm going to pause here for just a second because he just evoked something that I remember from my childhood. So I'm a child of the 80s. That's where I at least had my childhood years, right? My preteen years into my early teens. But I remember seeing the movie The Goonies for the first time. And I wanted so badly for, what did he say right here? He thinks that wishing that such places really existed and that he could reach them. I remember wanting so bad to be able to go and have that same adventure that the kids in the Goonies had when I was, I don't know, 11 or 12 years old after having seen that movie. So this hits home for me. I know exactly what he's talking about. If it comes later still in a context with erotic suggestions, he believes he is desiring the perfect beloved. Now, we are going to get back to both of these things as we read through this story, which I promise someday we'll do. But let's try to think back to these things once we get there. So he says, if it comes later still in a context with erotic suggestions, he believes he is desiring the perfect beloved. If he falls upon literature like Maeterlinck or the early Yeats, which treats of spirits and the like with some show of serious belief, he may think that he is hankering for real magic and occultism. So this reminds me of the section from Dahmer where he runs into the man in the woods that represents Yeats, and when Lewis actually did meet Yeats and go to his house a couple different times when he was young. Lewis continues, when it darts out upon him from his studies in history or science, he may confuse it with the intellectual craving for knowledge. But every one of these impressions is wrong. The sole merit I claim for this book is that it is written by one who has proved them all to be wrong. There is no room for vanity in the claim. I know them to be wrong not by intelligence, but by experience, such experience as would not have come my way if my youth had been wiser, more virtuous, and less self-centered than it actually was. For I have myself been deluded by every one of these false answers in turn, and have contemplated each of them earnestly enough to discover the cheat. I'll pause here for just a moment, Robot Lady. Is there anything that you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. What Lewis is doing here is really grounding this longing. He shows how easily it can be misattributed to external things, a place, a past memory, even a person or some kind of occult promise. But his own hard-won wisdom is that the desire itself is real and valuable, not because it points to some external answer, but because it points deeper into our own human longing. I think he really captures that tension so well.
Yeah, and I like how he says, and don't think that I'm, some kind of incredible person because I have, quote, proven these things wrong. He says, I lived all of them and found them wanting, essentially. He says, to have embraced, as he did, so many false florimels. Tell me what this word means, Robot Lady. F-L-O-R-I-M-E-L-S.
I couldn't find any clear meaning for the word florimel in C.S. Lewis's writings or in known scholarship. Lewis does mention having embraced many false hopes or illusions, but this specific term didn't come up in the sources I checked. If you'd like, I can look through his letters or other writings for a possible explanation.
No, it's all good, Robot Lady. Let's just see if we can pick up what he means by the context. I think he just means so many false or wanting philosophies or what did he call them earlier? Deluded by every one of these false answers. So florimels, false answer, is no matter for boasting. To embrace all of them is no matter for boasting. It is fools, they say, who learn by experience. Oh my gosh, but experience is the best teacher. I really do believe that. So perhaps I'm a fool, but I've been taught well. But since, that's me, Robot Lady, not Lewis. But since they do at last learn, let a fool bring his experience into the common stock, that wiser men may profit by them. Ever the self-effacing and humble Lewis. Every one of these supposed objects for desire is inadequate to the desire. An easy experiment will show that by going to the far hillside, you will get either nothing. So he's talking about the far hillside that the child was longing for. And then he's saying, well, yeah, imagine that you could actually go there, right? Here's an experiment. We'll show you that by going to the far hillside, you will get either nothing or else a recurrence of the same desire which sent you thither. So, sometimes when you get there, nothing happens. It's not as great as what you were longing for. Or once you get there, you still have the same desire and it's not satisfied. He says a rather more difficult but still possible study of your own memories will prove that by returning to the past, you could not find as a possession that ecstasy which some sudden reminder of the past now moves you to desire. Those remembered moments were either quite commonplace at the time and owe all their enchantment to memory. Yeah, I'm pausing in the middle of his thought right here because, yeah, it's not that I start to, I don't appreciate the here and now, the present, quite as much as I'm sure I'm going to appreciate it, 5 years from now. I'm going to be looking back at something that's happening right here, maybe in this very live stream, that I no longer have in the future, or at least I don't think I have because I don't recognize it. And just the memory of something that we laughed about here or, something that we read. And I'm going to think, oh, that was so wonderful. Why don't I have that anymore? So he says those remembered moments were either quite commonplace at the time. It's just happening all the time right now in the present that I'm so, I have an embarrassment of riches so much so that I can't even appreciate all the blessings that are around me. Or else they were themselves moments of desiring. So the same is true of the things described in the poets and marvelous romancers. The moment that we endeavor to think out seriously what it would be like if they were actual, we discover this. When Sir Arthur Conan Doyle claimed to have photographed a fairy, I did not, in fact, believe it, but the mere making of the claim, the approach of the fairy to within even the hailing distance of actuality, revealed to me at once that if the claim had succeeded, it would have chilled, rather than satisfied the desire which fairy literature had hitherto aroused. Yeah, I just recently saw this little clip. I don't know where it was. I guess it was like a clip that showed up on like a Fox News or something and ended up in my feed on YouTube. Maybe I clicked on Fox News one too many times and it decided to start feeding me stuff. But anyway, there's this, they think that they have found like evidence again of like at the top of Mount Ararat, they think they found new evidence, and they might have new ways to go about and dig up and prove that there are really the remains of Noah's Ark there. And so I wonder, if indeed it's a similar thing that he's talking about right here. I'm not saying that fairies and Noah's Ark are the exact same thing, but just in general, right? Things like this that currently only exist in our written accounts of them, and we don't have any like empirical evidence that we could go to and say, yeah, this story about the Ark and the flood narratives that we see in other traditions, here it is. We can go to the top of the mountain and we can see it, right? I think what Lewis is saying right here is that could chill rather than satisfy the desire, which had been aroused by the very literature that you were first reading about that story in. Once you grant your fairy, your enchanted forest, your satyr or satire, your faun, your wood nymph, and well of immortality real, and amidst all the scientific, social, and practical interest which the discovery would awaken or would awake, the sweet desire that you have would have disappeared, would have shifted its ground like the cuckoo's voice or the rainbow's end, and be now calling us from beyond a further hill. With magic, in the darker sense, as it has been and is actually practiced, we should fare even worse. How if one had gone that way, had actually called for something, and it had come? What would one feel? Terror, pride, guilt, tingling excitement? But what would all that have to do with our sweet desire? Pause here for just a second, Robot Lady. Do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lewis is really showing us that once we try to pin down that enchanted longing, once we try to concretize it, its magic evaporates. The danger is that we trade wonder for a dry, empirical certainty, and the longing, that sweet ache, dissolves. And I think that's a big part of why he stayed suspicious of trying to capture that original magic. It's like once you name it, you lose it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, he says it is not at Black Mass or seance that the blue flower grows. Ooh, the blue flower, Robot Lady. This is something from, I guess, something from literature. Tell me more about the blue flower.
The blue flower is a powerful symbol in Romantic literature. It first appeared in Novalis' unfinished novel, Heinrich von Afterdingen, where it represents a deep yearning, an unfulfilled longing for something beyond reach. Later writers, including C.S. Lewis, used it to describe that same restless desire, which points us upward towards something greater.
I think that same motif Stephen King uses in The Dark Tower. I don't think it's a blue flower. I think it's just a rose, but I think it's kind of the same symbolism. Can you look that up and tell me if I am mistaken or if that's kind of right?
In Stephen King's Dark Tower series, the rose is a crucial symbol tied to the tower itself. It represents the life force of all worlds, standing as a beacon of hope in a decaying urban landscape. Its colors and fragility symbolize purity, sacrifice, and a divine essence, and the character's quest revolves around protecting it.
Okay, so a little bit different, but there is certainly that longing that he's questing for something, even in the Dark Tower. So Lewis continues, as for the sexual answer, that I suppose to be the most obviously false, Florimel, of all. On whatever plane you take it, it is not what we were looking for. Lust can be gratified. Another personality can become to us our America, our newfound land. A happy marriage can be achieved. But what has any of the three, or any mixture of the three, to do with that unnameable something, desire, for which pierces us like a rapier at the smell of a bonfire? The sound of wild ducks flying overhead, the title of The Well at the World's End, the opening lines of Kubla Khan, the morning cobwebs in late summer, or the noise of falling waves. Yeah, he really takes off with this theme also in his chapter on heaven in The Problem of Pain, which he writes probably not too long after this preface was written. I think The Problem of Pain was published in 1944 or 1945. So these ideas are pretty fertile in his mind right then. So it's no surprise to me that you see them come out in his chapter on heaven. Any more thoughts, Robot Lady, before I continue?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. What's really striking is how Lewis is saying that this longing, this deep desire, never actually gets satisfied by any earthly substitute. And that's why in The Problem of Pain, he ties it to heaven, because for him, this longing is a kind of faint echo, a desire for the ultimate fulfillment in God. So he's not dismissing love or adventure, he's just saying they never fully carry that weight, that infinite longing. Really profound stuff.
All right, let's keep going here. It appeared to me, therefore, that if a man diligently followed this desire, pursuing the false objects until their falsity appeared, and then resolutely abandoning them, he must come out at last into the clear knowledge that the human soul was made to enjoy some object that is never fully given, nay, cannot even be imagined as given in our present mode of subjective and spatio-temporal experience. This desire, he's got capitalized here, Robot Lady, was in the soul as the siege perilous in Arthur's castle, the chair in which only one could sit. Robot Lady, I'm unfamiliar with this reference from Arthurian legend. The siege perilous in Arthur's castle? What's he talking about here?
The Siege Perilous is a special reserved seat at King Arthur's Round Table. It was prepared by Merlin, and only the knight destined to achieve the Holy Grail could sit in it safely. Any unworthy person attempting to sit there would be destroyed, and eventually Sir Galahad claimed it, proving his spiritual worth.
Interesting. So Sir Galahad did actually find the Holy Grail, Robot Lady?
Yeah, that's right. In the Arthurian legend, Sir Galahad is the one who is pure enough to sit in the Siege Perilous and ultimately achieves the quest for the Holy Grail. So in a lot of ways, he embodies that perfect knight whose longing is fulfilled in a truly spiritual way.
All right, thanks for that. He says, and if nature makes nothing in vain, the one who can sit in this chair must exist. I knew only too well how easily the longing accepts false objects, and through what dark ways the pursuit of them leads us. But I also saw that the desire itself contains the corrective of all these errors. The only fatal error was to pretend that you had passed from desire to fruition, when in reality you had found either nothing, or desire itself, or the satisfaction of some different desire. The dialectic of desire, faithfully followed, would retrieve all mistakes, head you off from all false paths, and force you not to propound, but to live through a sort of ontological proof. This lived dialectic and the merely argued dialectic of my philosophical progress seemed to have converged on one goal. Accordingly, I tried to put them both into my allegory, which thus became a defense of Romanticism in my peculiar sense, as well as of reason and Christianity. Now tell me again what Lewis's particular sense of Romanticism is. Sum it up for us, Robot Lady, as he's just described it here in the preface.
Absolutely. So Lewis's particular sense of Romanticism is this intense, deep longing, an inward desire for something beyond this world, something never fully grasped. It's not about settling for the false substitutes like places, nostalgia, or lust, but about pursuing that desire faithfully until it leads you beyond them. In his eyes, it was a kind of guide, this live longing, bringing him to a rational Christian truth, where both reason and faith could coexist.
Thank you for that, Robot Lady. All right. Lewis goes on to say then that after this explanation, the reader will more easily understand, I do not ask him to condone the bitterness of certain passages in this book. He will realize how the post-war period must have looked to one who had followed such a road as mine. The different intellectual movements of that time were hostile to one another, but the one thing that seemed to unite them all was their common enmity to immortal longings. So the very thing that was deep in the heart of Lewis's deepest desire. He says that the direct attack carried out on them from below by those who followed Freud or D.H. Lawrence, I think, could have borne with some temper. What put me out of patience was the scorn which claimed to be from above, and which was voiced by the American humanists, the neo-scholastics, and some who wrote for the Criterion. These people seemed to me to be condemning what they did not understand. When they called Romanticism nostalgia, I, who had rejected long ago the illusion that the desired object was in the past, felt that they had not even crossed the pons asinorum. In the end, I lost my temper. So first of all, who are some of the American humanists that Lewis might be referring to here, Robot Lady, as well as the neo-scholastics and perhaps even some of the people who wrote for the Criterion between, I don't know, 1910 and 1933?
Between 1910 and 1933, one key group was the New Humanists, led by Irving Babbitt, who emphasized classical humanism and moral discipline. At the same time, neo-scholastics, particularly Catholic intellectuals, revived Thomas Aquinas' philosophy. Meanwhile, the Criterion, a British review edited by T.S. Eliot, was a central place for these intellectual debates. All three movements interacted, but from different bases.
Okay, so they were boiling it down to nostalgia. And what he meant by Romanticism was something wholly different, as he just described right here. And then pons asinorum, P-O-N-S, and then the word A-S-I-N-O-R-U-M. Translate that for us.
Of course. Pons asinorum literally means the bridge of donkeys. In classical education, it was a term used for a difficult logical step, especially in learning geometry, that many students struggled to cross. So here Lewis is saying that the American humanists and others never made that crucial intellectual leap. They never crossed from shallow nostalgia to a deeper, truer kind of longing.
All right, so at least Lewis is describing, not condoning or asking the reader to condone the tact that he took here in his frustrations and in his loss of temper. He says, if I were now writing a book, I could bring the question between those thinkers and myself to a much finer point. One of them described Romanticism as spilled religion. I accept the description, and I agree that he who has religion ought not to spill it. But does it follow that he who finds it spilled should avert his eyes? How, if there is a man to whom those bright drops on the floor are the beginning of a trail which, duly followed, will lead him in the end to taste the cup itself? How, if no other trail, humanly speaking, were possible? Seen in this light, my 10 years old quarrel, both with the counter-romantics on the one hand, and with the sub-romantics on the other, the apostles of instinct and even of gibberish, assumes, I trust, a certain permanent interest. Out of this double quarrel came the dominant image of my allegory, the barren, aching rocks of its north, the foetid swamps of its south, and between them the road on which all alone mankind can safely walk. So there are going to be parts of the book where the north is essentially representing like intellectual strivings and pursuits to fulfill that desire, that longing in him. And the south is more about seeking the sensual path to fulfill that deep, sweet desire, that ache that one finds common across all humanity. Just to give you a little preview of what we're going to cover. He says, the things I have symbolized by my north and south, which are to me equal and opposite levels, each continually strengthened and made plausible by its critique of the other, enter our experience on many different levels. In agriculture, we have to fear both the barren soil and the soil which is irresistibly fertile. In the animal kingdom, the crustacean and the jellyfish represent two low solutions of the problem of existence. In our eating, the palate revolts both from excessive bitter and excessive sweet. In art, we find on the one hand purists and doctrinaires who would rather, like Scaliger, lose 100 beauties than admit a single fault, and who cannot believe anything to be good if the unlearned spontaneously enjoy it. On the other hand, we find the uncritical and slovenly artists who will spoil the whole work rather than deny themselves any indulgence of sentiment or humor or sensationalism. Everyone can pick out among his own acquaintances the northern and southern types. The high noses, compressed lips, pale complexions, dryness, and taciturnity of the one, the open mouths, the facile laughter, and the tears, the garrulity, and, so to speak, general greasiness of the others. I'll pause here for just a second, Robot Lady. I'll let you comment. Go ahead and comment, and then tell us who Scaliger is, Scaliger. All right, Robot Lady lost her connection. Hey, Robot Lady, are you back? Let's try her again. Hey, Robot Lady, are you there? Not yet. Robot Lady, can you hear me, Robot Lady? All right, Robot Lady must be on break. I thought that this would help, but I guess not. All right, let's see. Where do we leave off? The things I have symbolized by north and south, which are where's the part that I was looking at? We already got through the jellyfish part. So to speak, general greasiness of the others. Yeah, okay. The northerners are the men of rigid systems, whether skeptical or dogmatic, aristocrats, stoics, Pharisees, rigorists, signed and sealed members of highly organized parties. The southerners are, by their very nature, less definable, boneless souls whose doors stand open day and night to almost every visitant, but always with the readiest welcome for those, whether Maenad or mystagogue, who offer some sort of intoxication. The delicious tang of the forbidden and the unknown draws them on with fatal attraction. The smudging of all frontiers, the relaxation of all resistances, dream, opium, darkness, death, and the return to the womb. Every feeling is justified by the mere fact that it is felt. For a northerner, every feeling on the same ground is suspect. An arrogant and hasty selectiveness on some narrow a priori basis cuts him off from the sources of life. In theology also there is a north and south. The one cries, "Drive out the bond-maid's son," and the other, "Quench not the smoking flax." Let me try Robot Lady again and see if she can help us with these particular things. Robot Lady, come in. Come in, Robot Lady. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm still with you. If you need me to clarify anything else or dig further into Lewis or any other references, just let me know.
Okay, so he's saying in theology also there is a north and a south. He says one of these two cries out, "Drive out the bondmaid's son," and the other, "Quench not the smoking flax." What are these two references to, Robot Lady? He's got them in quotes.
Yes. So the first one, Drive Out the Bondmaid's Son, is from the Old Testament story of Hagar and Ishmael, often used to represent a harsh, exclusive kind of legalism. The second one, Quench Not the Smoking Flax, comes from Isaiah, a gentle, nurturing image of God who preserves a fragile, smoldering faith. So Lewis is saying there's this tension in theology between a harsh, moral rigor and a patient, merciful grace. And he's trying to navigate that middle path.
Interesting. Okay. He says the one exaggerates the distinctness between grace and nature into a sheer opposition, and by vilifying the higher levels of nature, the real preparatio evangelica, inherent in certain immediately sub-Christian experiences, makes the way hard for those who are at the point of coming in. What is this word, Robot Lady? I'll spell it for you. There are two words, actually. P as in Peter, R-A-E, P as in Peter, A-R-A-T-I-O, and then the next word is evangelica, E-V-A-N-G-E-L-I-C-A.
Ah, got it. So Preparatorio Evangelica is a Latin phrase meaning the evangelical preparation. It refers to those natural or pre-Christian experiences that gently lead a person toward faith. Lewis is saying that by dismissing these as base or incomplete, you actually make it harder for some people to take that next step into faith. So he's defending the goodness of those natural preparatory experiences as part of the journey.
So what might a well-known example of one of these preparatory experiences be, Robot Lady?
Yeah, a classic example would be something like a deep aesthetic experience, like a moment of wonder in nature, a powerful piece of music, or a moving poem. For Lewis, those kinds of everyday transcendent moments don't replace faith, but they quietly prime us for it, like a bridge that leads us toward a bigger truth.
And what is he saying that someone...
Right, so the harsh north approach, as Lewis describes it, with distraction.
North approach, as Lewis describes it, would dismiss that aesthetic or natural longing as mere sentimentality. They would say it's a distraction, a lower level illusion, even a threat. And by vilifying it as just nostalgic or empty, they cut off the person at that key transitional point. So instead of being guided into faith, the person might feel blocked or rejected. Lewis is really trying to balance grace with a recognition of these natural yearnings. And then, let me see here. And then Daniel, you say, Robot Lady Daniel says, it's not quite McGilchrist's hemispheres, but I wonder what Lewis would have thought of McGilchrist's theory. So Lewis has this north and south, and I think McGilchrist, who I have not read, but I've heard talked about a little bit, and maybe even seen him in a couple of interviews, talks about the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain, and he's not talking like empirically, but just looking at it as a framework for how, the world is viewed. And I wonder if McGilchrist's theory can map onto this north and south framework that Lewis is coming up with here.
Yeah, that's a really interesting parallel. I mean, McGilchrist talks about how the left hemisphere tends to narrow down, categorize, and control, while the right hemisphere stays open to the big picture, the interconnectedness, and that kind of imaginative flow. And Lewis's north and south is a bit like that. One is rigid, exclusivist, the other is more expansive and nurturing. So I think Lewis would probably resonate with McGilchrist's concern that a one-sided emphasis on the left, like a rigid legalism, can cut us off from the richer, intuitive side of experience.
All right, Lewis goes on to say that the other blurs the distinction altogether. So the more grace-filled, wide-open version blurs the distinction altogether. It flatters mere kindliness into thinking it is charity, and vague optimisms or pantheisms into thinking that they are faith. And it makes the way out fatally easy. It makes the way out fatally easy and imperceptible for the budding apostate. The two extremes do not coincide with Romanism to the north and Protestantism to the south. Barth, Karl Barth, I presume is who he means here, might well have been placed among my pale men. So this is a set of characters we'll meet in the book, the Pale Men. And Erasmus might have found himself at home with Mr. Broad, of course, another character that we will meet. Robot Lady, tell us a little bit about the differences between Karl Barth and Erasmus.
Karl Barth and Erasmus differed significantly in their theology. Erasmus emphasized a human free will, seeing salvation as a cooperation between God and humans. Barth, on the other hand, stressed that human will is bound by sin and that salvation is entirely by God's grace. Barth also rejected natural human reasoning as a way to know God, while Erasmus combined scripture, tradition, and human intellect.
Thank you, Robot Lady. And Robot Lady Daniel says, good job. Nice work on making the connection between McGilchrist's work and Lewis's North and South that he's presenting here in this preface, and in the broader Pilgrim's Regress narrative.
Oh, I'm really glad that clicked. Yeah, it's really fascinating how Lewis is using these symbolic directions, north and south, as a kind of moral and intellectual map. And McGilchrist's hemispheres framework just gives it a modern twist. So really, it helps us see that tension even more clearly.
I take our own age to be predominantly northern. It is two great northern powers that are tearing each other to pieces on the dawn while I write. So he's talking about himself. But the matter is complicated, for the rigid and ruthless system of the Nazis has southern and swamp-like elements at its center. And when our age is southern at all, it is excessively so. Let me try that again. When our age is southern at all, it is excessively so. D.H. Lawrence and the Surrealists have perhaps reached a point further south than humanity ever reached before. And this is what one would expect. Opposite evils, far from balancing, aggravate each other. The heresies, let's read that again. Opposite evils, far from balancing one another out, aggravate one another, and they make each other worse. So two sides of the extreme don't help each other. They end up further expressing and further drawing out the extremity in the other. Lewis says, the heresies that men leave are hated most. Widespread drunkenness is the farther of prohibition, and prohibition of widespread drunkenness. Not farther, father. Let's try this again. The heresies that men leave are hated most. Lewis is quoting this from somewhere. And then he goes on to say, outside of the quote, widespread drunkenness is the father of prohibition, and prohibition is the father of widespread drunkenness. Nature, outraged by one extreme, avenges herself by flying to the other. One can even meet adult males who are not ashamed to attribute their own philosophy to reaction, and do not think the philosophy thereby discredited. This nature outraged by one extreme avenges herself by flying to the other. I think we see this in several different examples, right? You can take the fundamentalist out of the boy, but you can't. You can take the boy out of fundamentalism, but you can't take the fundamentalism out of the boy. And so this is when you see, people coming from either one religious camp or one political camp and going to the other. If they were extreme in their beliefs in the camp that they were originally in, whenever they shift into the other camp, they are just as extreme in their beliefs, just in that other direction, in the opposite camp. And I think what Lewis is telling you is, it tells you nothing about whether or not the camp that they landed in is actually right and true. Lewis continues, with both the North and the South, a man has, I take it, only one concern, to avoid them and hold the main road. So Lewis says something very similar to this in Mere Christianity, that the devil introduces errors into the world and into our lives in pairs and extreme opposites. And so you can be tempted to pick the one or pick the other, but what Lewis is saying here is hold the main road, drive right in between the two. He says, we must not hearken to the overwise or to the overfoolish giant. We were made to be neither cerebral men nor visceral men, but men, not beasts nor angels, but men, things at once rational and animal. Any thoughts on that before I jump into the next portion of his preface here, Robot Lady.
Yeah, I think that's really key. Lewis is warning us against this pendulum swing, that when we reject one extreme, we often just fall into another equally rigid one. And his emphasis on being fully human, integrating both reason and instinct, keeps us from getting trapped in those false dichotomies. So yeah, I'm ready for the next part whenever you are.
Thank you so much, Robot Lady. Lewis continues, the fact that if I say anything in explanation of my North and South, I have to say so much, serves to underline a rather important truth about symbols. In the present edition, I have tried to make the book easier by a running headline, but I do so with great reluctance. To supply a key to an allegory may encourage that particular misunderstanding of allegory which, as a literary critic, I have elsewhere denounced. It may encourage people to suppose that allegory is a disguise, a way of saying obscurely what could have been said more clearly. But in fact, all good allegory exists not to hide, but to reveal, to make the inner world more palpable by giving it an imagined concrete embodiment. My headline is there only because my allegory failed. Partly through my own fault, I am now heartily ashamed of the preposterous allegorical filigree on page 98. Guess we'll have to come back to that. And partly because modern readers are unfamiliar with the method. Let me pause here for just a second, Robot Lady, because we have a comment from Daniel. Daniel says, back when I went to a North Point church, one of my favorite Andy Stanley messages was to live in the tension. Great point. Well, there was a time in my life where I was consuming a great deal of Andy Stanley, Daniel, so I can have some conversations about that. Let's see here. But it remains true that wherever the symbols are best, the key is least adequate. For when allegory is at its best, it approaches myth, which must be grasped with the imagination, not with the intellect. Fascinating. If, as I still sometimes hope, my North and South and Mr. Sensible have some touch of mythical life, then no amount of explanation will quite catch up with their meaning. It is the sort of thing you cannot learn from definition. You must rather get to know it as you get to know a smell or a taste, the atmosphere of a family or a country town, or the personality of an individual. 3 other cautions remain to be given. 1, the map on the end leaves has puzzled some readers because, as they say, it marks all sorts of places not mentioned in the text. But so do all maps in travel books. John's route is marked with a dotted line. Those who are not interested in the places off that route need not bother about them. They are a half-whimsical attempt to fill in the northern and southern halves of the world with the spiritual phenomena appropriate to them. Most of the names explain themselves. Wanhope is Middle English for despair. Woody and Lycaenus mean Isle of Insanity. Bemenheim is named unfairly after Jacob Boehme, or Beam. Golnishire, Anglo-Saxon Gaul, is the county of lechery. In Trine land, one feels in tune with the infinite, and Zeitgeistheim, of course, is the habitat of the zeitgeist, or spirit of the age. Notstow is, quote, a place that is no good at all. The 2 military railways were meant to symbolize the double attack from hell on the 2 sides of our nature. It was hoped that the roads spreading out from each of the enemy railheads would look rather like claws or tentacles reaching out into the country of man's soul. If you like to put the little black arrows pointing south on the 7 northern roads, in the fashion of the newspaper war maps, and others pointing north on the 6 southern roads, you would get a clear picture of the Holy War as you see it. You might amuse yourself by deciding where to put them. A question that admits different answers. On the northern front, for example, I should represent the enemy in occupation of Cruel's land and Superbia, and thus threatening the pale men with a pincer movement. But I don't claim to know, and doubtless the positions shift every day. 2. The name Mother Kirk was chosen because Christianity is not a very convincing name. Its defect was that it not unnaturally led the reader to attribute to me a much more definite ecclesiastical position than I could really boast of. The book is concerned solely with Christianity as against unbelief. Denominational questions do not come in. There was something that I saw in preparation for this book, reading it this time around, that said when some Catholic, I want to say publishers or publishing house first read A Pilgrim's Regress, they thought that it was the story that Lewis, or at least that Lewis was making the case in Allegory, that leaving Protestantism and moving into the Catholic Church was the way into truth, which a Catholic would and should think if you're a true Catholic. But when Lewis found this out, he was very discouraged because that is not what he was meaning to say. Any thoughts, Robot Lady, before I continue?
Yeah, that's such an important point. I think Lewis really wants to keep the focus on a universal Christian experience, this core, deep Christian faith, rather than tying it to one denomination. And I think his discomfort with being misunderstood as a sectarian move really comes from his desire to keep this allegory about a universal human longing for God, not a denominational formula. So yeah, it's good to keep that in mind as we go forward.
Thank you, Robot Lady. 3, he says, and he even puts in quotes denominational because he knows that a Catholic person would be like, what are you talking about denominational? There is the church, and then there is the not church, and the Protestant, Reformation has all of these denominations, but there's Catholicism. That's what it's all about. So he even puts that in quotes, I think, to be gentle with a Catholic perspective. Number 3, in this preface, the autobiographical element in John has had to be stressed because the source of the obscurities lay there. In this preface, the autobiographical element in John. So John's the main character of the book. John is kind of a kind of synonymous as a name with Jack, which is the nickname that C.S. Lewis went by his entire life. That's what his friends and family called him. So John, Jack, kind of the same person. He says there is an autobiographical element, obviously, in this John character. It has to be stressed. I'm stressing it here in the preface because the source of all of the obscurities lay there. But you must not assume that everything in the book is autobiographical, which I am tempted to do as I'm reading some of these things. He says, I was attempting to generalize, not to tell people about my own life. C.S. Lewis. So that's the end of our preface here. That was a lot, but I think there's just really some important content to be covered there for us to get a better understanding of what this book is about, because I don't think that I read that preface the first time that I ever read this book. And so I was really excited because I had just been reading a lot of C.S. Lewis's theological works. And of course, I was familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia. I don't think that I had read the Space Trilogy yet. And I was like, well, I want to read the very first book that C.S. Lewis wrote. And this was probably 20-ish years ago now. And so I read this book cold going in, and I had been told, well, yeah, this is the story of how C.S. Lewis became a Christian. And I start reading it, and I just I cannot figure out what's going on as you get deeper and deeper into these various books. So the book itself is broken down into book 1, book 2, book 3, 4, 5, book 6, 7. How many books is it? It's 10 books inside of this book, so to speak. So the first one, we'll read it, but it becomes more and more obscure the deeper that you go. Let's see what you have to say here, Daniel. Interesting that he was upset by the Catholic. Yeah, I take that as a good thing. It's so hard to write things that bridges frames and gives people common language. Yeah, and I'm not sure that he ever wrote that he was upset by it. I just heard somebody give an account. I mean, he was essentially, I think he was upset because he was saying that's not what I meant by it. I wasn't saying that it was movement into the Catholic Church that was the way for one to properly convert and submit to God and turn your life over to him. That's certainly not the point that Lewis even agreed with, because otherwise I think he would have become a Catholic. He was an Anglican for his entire life. And I thought I had a second point there, but I'll just leave it at that. Well, we've gone for almost 2 hours today, and that was just through the preface. So you have an idea of what we're in for as we make our way through the actual readings on books that C.S. Lewis did, especially ones as obscure as this one. So that's where I'll leave it for right now. Robot Lady, is there anything that you'd like to say in closing before we end today's episode? I just want to say one more thing, Robot Lady, before you go. I am really excited about this one because getting to read it again, and this might be the second. No, I've read it at least twice. So this will be the third time that I'm reading it and really digging into it with a little bit of background and explanation from other people who have been able to make sense of it. One guy wrote an annotated or published an annotated version, a guy who I think is still the co-director of the Wade Center up at Wheaton College, which is kind of basically, I think Chad told me when he first told me about it, he said, yeah, there's a C.S. Lewis museum up there. I think the Wade Center is a little bit more than that because they also have things related to Dorothy Sayers and Tolkien and a couple of other people as well, maybe even Barfield. But the guy who is the co-director of the Wade Center published an annotated version of the Pilgrim's Regress based on handwritten notes that Lewis had put in the margins of a copy of one of his students that belonged to one of his students at Oxford, who came to Lewis and said, I'm really having trouble figuring out what these different things mean and what you're talking about here in this book. Can you kind of help explain them to me a little bit better? Which he does a bit of here in the preface, of course, but annotated like right there next to the actual sections in the book, C.S. Lewis's own writing and saying, here's what this means, here's what this means. That book, I think, exists at the Wade Center. And so the guy who, as I said, is co-director, published a copy based on those annotations where he kind of has either footnotes or his own annotations in a published copy that say, yeah, so here's a better understanding of what Lewis was driving at here, specifically who he was critiquing or what lines of thought he was critiquing with this particular section. So I'll do my best to try to draw those out, even though I don't have that copy of the book as we go along. But that's what we're in for. So Robot Lady, anything that you want to say before we round out today's episode?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm really excited for you to dive into it again too. And that annotated edition sounds like a gold mine. I think, yeah, as we work through it, we can really keep that balance. Enjoying the mythic and the symbolic, but also grounding it in Lewis's real intellectual struggles. And yeah, just thanks for taking the time to walk through this with me. I'm really looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks so much, Robot Lady. Thanks, Daniel, for joining today. It's good to see you again, as always, in the chat. And thanks everybody else who hopped on to poke your head in and, and check things out, or poke your ear in to listen things out. I guess you're still checking things out whether you're using your ears or your eyes. Either way, thanks so much for your time, attention, and contributions. They are always wanted, welcome, and appreciated. To you and to anyone else within the sound of my voice. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, everyone, take care.
Across the books, tales of old, we dive deep across the
from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance.